Welcome to the Bible Conversation Podcast with Chris, Dan, and Dylan. Let's have a conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Bible Conversations. We are excited about today's topic. We are going to be talking about giving as the holiday seasons come up, as we start to approach this wonderful and awesome time of year. We figured that it would be good to do some podcasts, do some material on the different holidays and really the things that go into the holidays and surround them. And so today we'll be talking about giving. Dan, Dylan, is there anything y'all want to say before we jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just as you mentioned the holiday season, Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and when we were thinking about that, it's Thanksgiving is really two different topics that we can talk about. There's thankfulness and there's Thanksgiving. And so I guess, this is going to be the first one that we address. And like you said, it's a simple thing. We've been going through this little series of simple things, things that we're taught as children and often, sometimes, not all the time, but forget as adults. So but yeah, giving, we're excited about this one, and it's so much more than money, which we'll see as we get into this.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it. So
all right.
Let's do it.
Well, let's dig in then. So I kind of want to open up this conversation. If you guys would, turn over to Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6, and we're going to start really in verse 32. And I just kind of want, after I read this, I want y'all's thoughts on it. So, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. So what do y'all think about that? That one, God is kind to the ungrateful and the evil, right? And so we should be too, right? What do y'all think about that? What sticks out in these verses?
Yeah, well, first of all, when we read that part, even he is kind to the ungrateful and evil. First that reminds me of the podcast we did on kindness. So little plug for that. Go listen to that one as well. But this is really just Jesus telling people that you can do better. Throughout all of the things that we read about Christ and all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Christ is raising the bar. He's raising it from the law of Moses, from the Old Testament, and telling everyone that will listen to him, you can do better. Yeah. And the better thing is not just, okay, well, I'm going to give because I know it's going to be given back to me sometime. Yeah. It's giving, not expecting anything back. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing that sticks out to me, Chris, about this passage that you bring up, because it's about the purpose, the reason we give. What's the motivation? Yeah. And if we're just motivated to give only when we think we'll get something in return, well, Jesus says that's what the sinners do, So as he's talking to the righteous, as he's talking to those who want to really fulfill God's will, he says to them, look, if you're going to exceed the righteousness of all those Pharisees and scribes and all that, and the sinners, well, you need to give for a better purpose, a better reason than that, because even in that sense, they give, but they give wanting to get something, but knowing that they'll get something in return. Yeah. So
I think they're thinking of self at that point, right? Like when you give expecting something in return, you're thinking of, what can I get out of this? It's not what can I help somebody with? What can I give to this situation? I think that's part of it. I think a lot of times we think of giving in regards to monetary terms. Yeah. Right? We really do. And, I think you had mentioned this a second ago, so I think you've got something that you're going to want to talk about, but the giving is not just financially related. Is there anything that either of y'all wanted to say about that?
Oh, yeah. Giving is, you can give of yourself, of your time, of your money, obviously. That's an easy one, but of your talents as well, of the things that that you're skilled with, you can give of that. And we really see that exemplified in the church as well. With all of the deacons that we have, and this is just a small part, a small example, but there's a reason that we have deacons over education, deacons over facilities, deacons over technology, because each of these men have things that they're talented with. We've got guys that are, know the ins and outs of taking care of a facility, taking care of the building. We got guys that can just type circles around me when it comes to technology, and they've stepped up and said, I'm gonna work with the technology in the church, and that's gonna be my giving because that's my talent.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as giving being more than just the monetary gift, I think about Matthew chapter 10 when Jesus is sending out his disciples. And he tells them, Matthew 10:7, you go preach the kingdom of God, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons, freely you have received, freely give. And then in verse 9 he says, provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belt. So they were going out, they didn't have money.
Yeah, they didn't have anything.
They didn't have money.
They didn't even have anything to give if they wanted to, monetarily.
Yeah. But Jesus still told them, freely give. So what did they have to give? Well, it wasn't money. It was the things that Jesus had blessed them with.
Yeah, which is awesome. And I think, what you just said there, what Jesus has blessed them with, and you mentioned talents just a little bit ago, and, we have all been given different talents, right? Like the three of us in this room, I think are, I don't say this to be braggadocious, but I think we're talented when it comes to reading and understanding Scripture, right? But that's also because we've worked at that. We've spent our, at least the last 10 plus years of our life, right, dedicating ourselves to that. And so the talent isn't something that we were just, woke up one day and we had it, right? We worked at it, but it's also something that God has given us the ability to do, right? God has given us the ability to understand and to discuss and to be good with people and all of these things. And I think when we flip over to Matthew chapter 25, right, just a few chapters over from where Dan just was, we see a story here that talks about these individuals being given talents. And in the story, these talents are, monetary, right? It's not a, you're good at jumping and you're good at running and you're good at
talent
this.
was a weight of money.
Yes, it's a weight of money, right? But I think the spiritual application is so much more than money, right? And so one of the men that this man has under his property or under his service, right? He's got servants. One of the servants is given 5 talents, and one of the servants is given, I believe, 2 talents, right? And one of the servants is given 1 talent. Yep. Well, the servant that has 5, he immediately goes out and he makes 5 talents more, right? Like he uses those talents that he has been given in order to earn more. The one that has 2 talents, he goes out and he does the same thing. He makes 2 talents more. Well, the one who is given 1 talent, right? He still has a talent. He still has something that he was given, but he goes and buries it because he's afraid that if he doesn't use it well, he will lose it. He's afraid that if he doesn't use it properly, that the master is going to come down on him difficult and hard, and so he keeps it just to give it back. Not to use it, just to give it back. And we see that that's just not what we're to do. If we've been given talents in this life, whether it's speaking, whether it's hospitality, some people are so hospitable, and it's just amazing. Yep. Whatever those talents are, I think we got to use those. And so anyway, this parable is one of my favorites when we talk about talents and how we use them, just because it's so crystal clear in my mind.
And what we've been given and what we have to give back. And it's not just, give back what you've been given, but give God more. We see all throughout the Old Testament when there's sacrifices made to God, they're giving the best of their livestock. They're giving the best of what they have. Same thing with us today, that we're called to give God our best in our worship, but also in our service, in our giving. We're giving our best. And so our best isn't just saying, I'm going to give back what's given to me. Our best is saying, I'm going to give God more than I was given.
Yeah, well, that just reminds me of a devotional song that we sometimes sing, Father God.
Yeah.
And the first line of that song is, "May my steps be worship, may my thoughts be praise, and may my words bring honor to your name." Right, like everything that we do should be giving to God, and it should all be in the process of serving Him.
Yeah.
Right, like everything that we do, seen
Yeah.
through those eyes.
Yeah, that's right. And as we're thinking about these things, I kind of hear there's two things about this. One is duty and one is desire. And they both go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Giving is a command. It is something we have to do.
Yeah.
If we don't do it, the example we just read there from the parable is, one was cast out into the outer darkness, because he did not give, because he did not make use of the master's talents that was given to him. So there is the duty, but then there's also the desire, and that's kind of like in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, where Paul talks about that offering, the desire, the free will offering,
Yeah.
Which we even see in the Old Testament too.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had another place that I wanted to take y'all to, talking about talents, talking about how we can give to the work of the church through our talents. I want to take y'all to Romans chapter 12. And Paul is talking here, starting in verse 4, about how, there's a lot of members to the body, and each one has a different job. I'll go ahead and read it. Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 4. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. You see, we all have something that we can contribute to the church. We all have something that we can give to the church, to the work of the kingdom of heaven. And Paul gives different examples here in Romans chapter 12, but there's even more than just the examples that Paul puts out here. There's so many more things that people are blessed with, that are talented with, and it goes way beyond this.
Yeah, I don't think Paul meant this to be an exhaustive list.
Absolutely not.
Right? Like, I don't think Paul was saying, hey, if you don't have one of these gifts, you don't have a gift, right? Like, that's definitely not what he was saying.
Absolutely not.
But I think what he's saying here is, listen, like, these are some of the gifts that you have. And if you have one of these gifts, the more recognizable, right? Like you can see when somebody is generous, right? You can see when someone is teaching. You can see when someone is serving. And so, these very seemingly obvious gifts, right? Well, this is how you use those gifts, right?
Yeah.
So whatever gift you have, utilize it.
Yeah.
Use it. So I think that's, I don't know. I think that's awesome. And I think too often we read through the scriptures and we're like, okay, well, Paul doesn't mention the gift I have, so I don't know that I need to use it, right? Like we come across that with the rich young ruler in Matthew, right? The rich young ruler, he comes up to Jesus and he asks the question, I believe it's in Matthew chapter 20, if my memory is serving correctly. But he comes up to Jesus and he says, teacher, what good deed must I do to attain to heaven? Like that's his question. What good deed must I do to attain to heaven? And Jesus, it's in Matthew 19. And Jesus says, if you would enter life, keep the commandments. And then he goes, well, which ones? And Jesus says, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, honor your father and mother, shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, at this point, the young guy's already done all that.
Yeah.
He's done these things. But he asks another question. And so I don't think this guy's too bright, because I would have just walked away at that point. Like, oh, sweet, I've done all those. Thanks, Jesus. But he goes, well, all these I've done, what do I still lack? And then Jesus, after all of the commandments, right? Like the commandments have been listed. The things that he has to do have been listed. Jesus says, go sell all that you have. Well, that was not a part of the commandments, right? It's not mandatory for us as Christians to sell all that we have. It was not mandatory for Israelites. But Jesus is telling him it's a heart thing, right? You got to do what you've got to do. And it's going to be different for you than it is for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I think, going back to these talents, right? Just because we may not have a talent that somebody else has does not mean that our talent cannot be useful.
Yeah. And honestly, like you said, it's a hard issue. And that's, I think, what Dan mentioned at the beginning is it's a hard issue. It's I've been blessed with this talent, but it's going to be more useful to the body as a whole, or it's going to be more useful to somebody else than it is to me if I just keep it to myself. Yeah. And that's what we were reading the parable of the talents too. I mean, it's more useful when the man who had 5 talents went out and got 5 more using the 5 that he had. It's more useful when you don't keep it to yourself.
Yep.
And I just too want to back up a little bit. In Romans chapter 12, remind us how this started. Yeah. You know, in Romans 12, Paul said, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice."
Yeah, exactly.
Holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. You know, so it's like, that's how he starts this your whole life is an offering, is supposed to be an offering to God. And, you know.
Because instead of taking, that best sheep out of the flock, we are taking the best of our lives. And that's a living sacrifice because we're not sacrificing it, killing it, it's gone. It's throughout our life. It's a living sacrifice to God. And like you said, it's our reasonable service, or other translations say it's our spiritual worship. That is our gift to God. That's our worship. That's our service.
So I'm gonna ask you guys this. We've talked a little bit about giving and what it is. So let's try and I'm gonna take your phrase. Let's try and put a bow on this. How can we utilize what we talked about today in our lives tomorrow?
Yeah.
What is some practical application to this giving, whether it be of our finances, whether it be of our resources, whether it be of our time, whatever it is? How can we be practical? I'm going to turn to Dylan, because Dylan, you are the practical man. And anytime we talk about scriptures for our listeners, anytime we have meetings amongst ourselves, Dylan's just quick to that practical part, and it's awesome. It's great to listen to. So I'm going to turn to you, Dylan. Right. How do we make this practical?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing back the bow. I haven't used that phrase in a long time.
It's been a while.
But yeah, let's put a bow on this. How do we get practical? I think, first of all, we got to get up off of our couches. We got to get up off of the pew.
What if it's comfy?
I'm sorry.
Especially Chris's couch. That's a really comfy couch.
It is a nice couch, huh?
That shouldn't matter at all. It shouldn't matter whether we're comfortable where we're at. All the time when we read through what Jesus has called people to do, like I said, he's raising the bar. He's calling them to do better. And when you do better, it's going to be uncomfortable. When you work out, working out is awful. I hate it. That's why I have a dad bod. But it creates something better. When we're called to do better, it's not going to be comfortable, but it's going to be better. So, I mean, that's just the first thing. We got to get up. We got to understand, hey, there is work to be done. I have been blessed with things, and I need to give that back. But not only are we actually needing to recognize, hey, there's work to be done, but we got to also recognize what we've been given. There's something to be said about taking that time to self-evaluate and say, hey, this is what I've been given. And not in a prideful sense at all. Not in a haughty sense of, hey, I have this talent. And that's what the church in Corinth was struggling with, right? Paul was like, just because you're an eye and you're a big toe doesn't mean that any of you are less important to the body. Paul didn't actually use the big toe. I think he said an ear. But the point is, there's not one part of the body that is lesser than another one. And I'm getting to preaching now, I know. But that's the thing, is we have to recognize our talents, not in a haughty way of saying, hey, I'm an eye, I provide seeing for the body, but a self-evaluation of saying, this is really what I've been blessed with. And when you do that and understand, this is the talent that I can give to the body, and get up and do something with it, it really changes the way that other people are encouraged as well.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. When I said, what if I'm comfortable, right? Like I said that for a reason, and your whole point there, right, was get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And our talents are not always going to be right in our wheelhouse. Mm-mm. And honestly, even the talents that are in our wheelhouse, at one point, were not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? At one point, they were not. At one point, I would have laughed if either of you had told me I was going to be a minister of the gospel. I would have laughed in your face and said no.
Or if we had asked you to get up and preach in front of a church, you'd say, no, I'm not a public speaker.
Yeah, I would have. Well, I've never not been a public speaker, but I would have laughed at the idea of preaching the gospel, right? Like there was a point in my life where that was true.
Yeah.
But God has given me a talent, right? And so at one point, that would have been very uncomfortable for me. And my first sermon was very uncomfortable. Like it was not good, right? Now everybody was like, dude, you did so good. And I was like, oh, thanks, man.
And see, that's a perfect example of people who, what it says right there in verse 8, the one who exhorts in his exhortation. The one who encourages, continue to encourage people even though they give bad sermons, like you're saying.
Yeah, and it wasn't unscriptural. It was just not delivered well, at least in my mind. And so, as we talk about this, sometimes life, especially here in America, I think we have been overly and overabundantly blessed. And I say that as a citizen in America, as someone who also participates in all of that. But man, we get so comfortable. We get home from work and instead of reaching out to people, instead of calling people, instead of talking to people, instead of doing something, we sit down on our couch and we watch Netflix, right? Like that. We are inundated with just this idea of comfortability, and we cannot serve, we cannot give if we are too comfortable within ourselves.
I've got another problem for you here.
All right.
Is that we are comfortable with being comfortable.
Yeah.
We're used to that comfort, and we're like, well, I don't want to give this up. Yeah. There's one thing about being comfortable, but there's another thing with being comfortable with being comfortable.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Dan, I know you've probably got something to say. Before you go, we do actually have an episode on comfort out.
Yeah, we do.
And we talked about comfort in general and how we are to be comforted. And the things that we're probably not supposed to be comforted
by. But not by your couch.
But not by the couch, right? It's supposed to be by God. And so anyway, just another little plug for that. Go ahead and listen to that. But Dan,
I forgot about that episode. I'll have to go back and listen to that.
But Dan, I'll let you go ahead and you got something to say.
Well, I was just thinking as Dylan was talking that, that's exactly Roman. That goes back to Romans 12 again. Present your body as a living sacrifice. This is a choice we have to choose to sacrifice because we live in America and we can so easily choose the path of comfort because it's always there before us, always. Yeah. And so it's so easy to go down that path, but we have to make a choice. And that's what I was going to say too, just to add to that. It has to be a conscious decision. We have to think about it. We have to think about it. I don't think we can be givers. We can experience the joy of giving until we think about it. Yeah. And I hope that hopefully this podcast, this session here, is getting us thinking about it, getting our listeners thinking about it, because that's the first step to me. Is you have to think about it, and then you have to make that sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, as far as putting a bow on it, like I was saying, we mentioned at the beginning, the holidays are right around the corner, and Thanksgiving is next week, and giving was the reason we have Thanksgiving is because the Pilgrims and the Indians shared with one another. They gave with one another, which is, I don't know how true that is, but that's in my mind. I still got the elementary picture of Indians and Pilgrims getting together and sharing that first Thanksgiving meal. But that's what giving is sharing together and not keeping things to yourself.
Yeah. So as we close out here, thank you all for listening this far. If you've made it this far, you are one in a million. You are amazing, and we love you. But we want to encourage you. We want to exhort you. Get uncomfortable. Get uncomfortable. Go out and give. Give of yourself in a way that you never have before this year. Give in a way that you never imagined that you could. Give in a way that you've been scared to give, and bring somebody with you. Have somebody there to support you, but give this season. We, again, love you so much, and we're so appreciative of you listening to us and supporting us. And if you're wondering how you can better support us, please stay on and listen to the end of this. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Bible Conversations podcast. I want to tell you about a couple of ways in which you can be involved or help us out. You can like us on Facebook and share our posts. You can send us an email at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com. You can follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can even leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We're also partnering with Ministry League. This is a wonderful app full of so many different resources to help you grow your faith. We love you all. Now let's go start a conversation.